Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I'm leaving on the 5 train.
Labour's Deputy Leader Tom Watson has refused to apologise after he raised sexual abuse allegations against the late Lord Britton. To cries of shame from the Tory benches, Mr Watson said if anyone deserved an apology, it was the children who had been abused and ignored for years. And after the Prime Minister told him to examine his conscience over the allegations, he said all MPs should be doing the same. We'll hear from Mr Watson in a moment, after this report from our political correspondent, Michael Crick.
Some of the last pictures of Lord Britton, who died in January not knowing police had closed for lack of evidence. A second inquiry into an allegation that in the 60s he'd raped a 19-year-old woman called Jane. That inquiry resulted from a request by the man elected Labour Deputy Leader last month, Tom Watson, who's long pursued allegations of child sex offences against Lord Britton and others in high places.
And investigate clear intelligence suggesting a powerful paedophile network linked to Parliament and Number 10.
After Britton's death, Watson quoted an alleged survivor saying he came as close to evil as any human being could get. But on Friday, after some of the accusers had been discredited by Panorama, Mr Watson apologised. I have said in the past that I am sorry for the distress Leon Britton's family experienced as they grieved for him. I still am. And on the quote about Britton being evil, I shouldn't have repeated such an emotive phrase. But Lord Britton's widow and brother both told me today he had not made personal apologies to them. Tory MP Sir Nicholas Soames was so angry as to raise it in the Commons today.
To ask you whether you have had any request from the honourable gentleman, the member for West Bromwich East, to seek your permission for him to make a personal statement apologising for the way in which he has so vilely traduced the late Lord Britton, and further for him to have a chance to apologise to Lord Britton's dignified and courageous widow.
The Speaker let Watson respond.
Mr Tom Watson.
Mr Speaker, I understand that honourable and right honourable members feel aggrieved that Leon Britton was interviewed by the police and that they're angry with my use of language. But I'm sure they'd also agree that when anyone is accused of multiple sexual crimes by numerous completely unrelated sources, the police have a duty to investigate, no matter who it is.
But earlier on the radio, David Cameron too had suggested Watson had some explaining to do.
It's clear, I think, that he's got a lot of questions to answer, and the House of Commons Select Committees are quite rightly going to ask him some questions, and so I'm sure that he should answer those questions and examine his conscience about whether he's said enough so far.
Earlier, the Prime Minister has said that I should examine my conscience. Well, I think we all need to examine our consciences in this House. We've presided over a state of affairs where children have been abused and then ignored, dismissed and then disdained. If anyone deserves an apology, it's them.
Tories shouted shame. By not even repeating Friday's apology and going on the attack, Tom Watson has raised the stakes. Privately, some Labour MPs are unhappy too. And now, 2 Commons committees look set to pursue things further. Well, in the last hour or so, Tom Watson has released his correspondence with Alison Saunders, the Director of Prosecutions, last year, which seems to have led to the reopening of the case, the allegations made by Jane that she was raped by Leon Britton in his London flat in 1967. And Watson says in his letter to Alison Saunders that he believes that the case was dropped because he claims that a senior police officer told the victim, Jane, that it was being dropped because of certain stereotypes, what Watson calls stereotypes. And Watson says in his letter, I'm driven to the unpalatable conclusion that the identity of the alleged perpetrator, Leon Britton, may in some way have influenced treatment of the case. I hope I am wrong. But in my view, the case demands your personal attention, he said to Alison Saunders. Later in the same letter, Watson actually quotes what Jane had said to him. And in this quote, Jane talks about the trouble she had going through being interviewed by the police. And she says, quote, "I have repeatedly had to relive the most harrowing night of my life, long pushed to the back of my mind. I've been implicitly accused of making an allegation against someone because it is all about who he is. I've been implicitly accused of being a slut because I sat on a bed."
And what reply did Mr. Watson receive from Alison Saunders?
Well, Alison Saunders assured Mr. Watson that the Metropolitan Police still regarded this as a live case, and she also tried to assure Mr. Watson that stereotypes played no part in any decision-making.
Michael Crick in Westminster. Well, I sat down with Tom Watson immediately after his statement in the Commons and just before he published those letters that Michael's been referring to. I started by asking him why he didn't apologise to Leon Britton's family.
Look, John, in circumstances like this, you have to mean what you say, and I think I was right to try and make sure that the police and the criminal justice system were adhering to guidelines. And, you know, just to remind your viewers, there were multiple allegations of sexual crimes made against Leon Britton. And in those circumstances, I don't think it was unreasonable to ask that the guidelines were adhered to. And I think most reasonable people would think that where there are multiple allegations from people independent of each other, never met, that the first thing the police would want to do was to find out what the alleged suspect had to say.
Well, we'll come to those allegations in a moment and the sort of people who made them. But the critical thing surely is that you have a day after the man dies of an agonising death from cancer. You sign up to the idea that he was a man as close to evil as any human being could be. That requires a fundamental apology.
Look, what that statement came from an alleged survivor.
Yeah, but you
and I repeated it, and I regretted using that emotive language, and I've said that. But would
you imagine the grief that must have caused his family?
I did say at the time, I'm sorry for the distress it would cause.
What about telling them that you're sorry? You haven't even been in touch with them.
Well, because I feel that the survivors of sexual crimes, particularly child abuse, which this one is not the Jane's case is not related to, need to have their voice heard.
Now you may.
And
I
talked to. Well, let me just say. And I talked to two of the survivors, who were extremely distressed, who told me that they felt that justice would now not be done. They would not be able to have a proper investigation, and they were very emotional about it. So if I regret repeating their emotive words, and I've said that.
Well, you have said that you believe the right way to deal with these things is for the authorities, the police, to investigate them. And indeed, it's your job as an MP to raise issues like this and to have the police investigate them. And you did so a second time, after the police had already carried out an investigation. But you don't believe the police. What sets you up as being in some way a better investigator than the police?
Well, what happened in that particular case was it was reported in the newspapers that the case against Jane had been dropped. And she asked for an explanation of the police as to whether that was the case. And she had a very difficult meeting with a particular police officer on the case who promised her that within 2 weeks they would give her the reasons they dropped the case in writing. When the letter didn't arrive, they came to me and gave me an explanation. This is her and her husband. And then I wrote to the DPP to ask, to demand that all guidelines had been adhered to. The DPP wrote back to me on publishing these letters to say that as far as she was concerned, the guidelines had been adhered to and that it was a live investigation. Those were private letters and the matter closed there.
Well, they were investigated again. There were two investigations, one triggered by you.
Well, when I received the letter from the DPP, she wrote in a letter that it was a live investigation. So my interpretation was that this was an ongoing inquiry and that there was more evidence that was being examined. Now, I don't know the whole circumstances of the police investigation, nor should I know. But what I had was a survivor who felt that she had not had her voice heard in the criminal justice system, and I helped amplify that to the DPP. But it's not unreasonable for me to demand that the criminal justice system does its job, and you know, I've got some experience of trying to make sure that it does do that.
The other challenge here is that you've been pretty hot on pursuing conservative suspects, but you've had very little to say about Labour ones. Well, in other words, you're politically motivated.
That's actually not true. I've written publicly about the Rotherham inquiry. I've publicly commented on the Janner case. I have reported information that's been reported to me to the police on people who are Labour Party members, Liberal Democratic
but
Party
you will know
members,
better than I
and
that
Conservative
what's in the
Party
public
members.
domain is the banner flying up Watson versus Britain.
No.
There's no Watson versus Janner, Watson versus Rotherham.
Well, Watson in the public domain, I've written in national newspapers on Rotherham, and I can give you the articles.
Yeah, but you haven't written about Janner and about
Yes,
about
I have.
Rotherham.
I've published about Janner
Well,
to
not in the
200,000.
Daily Mirror, where you've had these very highly publicised articles, particularly in the aftermath of Leon Britton's death.
I have publicly commented to hundreds of thousands of people on social media on the Janner case.
Are you going to speak to Leon Britton's family?
I'm not entirely certain whether that would be productive.
Well, don't you think you could at least issue a genuine, heartfelt apology for the grief you caused?
John, I need to be honest to myself and to people. I believe that I was helping victims have their voice heard, and I don't want to cause more distress than has already been caused.
Do you believe that you may be causing more distress to the Labour Party as Deputy Leader, and that perhaps it might be wise to step down whilst this furore boils?
Absolutely not.
You believe you're fit for this office?
Of course I do.
Don't you think Jeremy Corbyn's got enough on his plate without having to deal with all this?
Well, I'm trying to get to the truth of historic child abuse over many decades, and we need a public policy response to that. That means that we can never again allow victims to have their voices unheard in the criminal justice system.
A Detective Chief Inspector resigned over the way in which you dealt with that case affecting Leon Britton. Do you regret that, and do you have an apology to make to him?
Well,
he did a good job.
All I can say to you is there is far more to this case than meets the eye, and I think that should be a concern for the Goddard inquiry, but I don't think it requires public comment now.
Tom Watson, thank you for talking to us.